everybody, Coach Simone Kelly here with another episode of Own Your Power Radio and Own Your Power TV. I'm so happy and delighted to have two of my favorite political figures in Miami who are here to share with us some of their views and advice for a lot of us, because there's been so much happening in the world today. And the topic today is called How to Own Your Power and Affect Change in Your Community. I think many of us feel helpless. We don't know what to do. There's only so many things you can post. There's only so many protests you can do, but there's things that we can actually physically do as an individual. And I think you guys are going to share with us some of those steps. So first and foremost, can we just kind of introduce yourself? Marlon, you want to go first? Marlon Hill?
Coach Kelly, it's always a pleasure seeing your beautiful Nubian face.
Thank you.
It's always great to be, just chatting it up with you. Well, I've been practicing law here in Miami for the last 24 years. I'm a proud product of South Miami Heights through senior high school, and been involved with a number of community issues over the years, mentoring, immigration, small business, entrepreneur advocacy. Step up to the plate to step into the gap of leadership, owning my own power, to run for political office, to succeed a 26-year incumbent, Commissioner Moss, after 26 years, term limits, stepping up District 9 in Southwest Miami-Dade County. So I'm going to be on the ballot August 18th. Thank you very much. My personal power, and that's one of the tips that you can do with your personal power. You can run for office or serve on a board, and I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, wonderful. And Dwight, you have the floor.
Hey, greetings, folks. I'm Dwight Bullard, former Florida State Senator. Had a chance to serve in an elected capacity for 8 years during the grand old years of the Obama administration, 2008 2016. Feels like forever ago. My current position is I'm the political director for a community-based organization here in Florida called the New Florida Majority. We engage predominantly the Black and brown community, but folks all over the state of Florida, training them on how to be civically engaged, how to own their own power, especially in the electoral space, and developing civic engagement. In my other capacity, my non-paid capacity, I'm now also the president of the South Dade branch of the NAACP here in Greater South Dade. Okay. So just out here trying to squeeze as much out of a 24-hour day as I can, clearly.
Right. I love it. And you know what I love about both of you guys is that not only do you work hard, you party harder. I always see you at events and functions, and we always have such a great time. So it's so good that at least there's to have balance. You
gotta have balance. You gotta own your personal power and make sure that you are owning your culture, because culture has power, right? So you got to enjoy it.
So let's jump into, I guess, the first question. It's a pretty broad question. So like I said, this might end up being a series. But how do we tackle racial injustice? Obviously, there's been a lot going on since George Floyd, and that it seems to be, so this is the question I had before I even asked that question. What do you think is different about the George Floyd incident versus all the others? Because it seems to me like this movement is like worldwide now. It seems a little bit stronger than like things that happened many years ago, even with the Mike Brown, and even like going back as far as 1992 with what's the gentleman that was the first one recorded?
Rodney King.
Yeah, Rodney King. So like. But now to me it seems like this is taken off. Like it's so beautiful to see like young people like these. The internet I think has helped. That might be a big part of it. We didn't have social media back then. But what do you think is different? I'm just curious on your perspective of that.
Well, I'll go first. Only because director Ava DuVernay said something very powerful the other night when she was having a conversation with Oprah. When she talked about why she felt impacted, felt a greater impact with this moment than any of the previous moments that you pointed out, Simone. Mm-hmm. And what she talked about was the idea that when you're watching this man plead for his life, beg for his life, say, I can't breathe, ask for his mother, it's accompanied by somebody showing zero compassion for the situation. In the case of Officer Chauvin, who was the Minnesota police officer that murdered George Floyd, you see him staring directly into a camera. So you see both men clearly facing the camera, one clearly begging for his life, asking for, some sense of compassion, and someone who had his hands in his pockets, clearly not caring for what was about to happen next. And so 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I mean, if you time that, if you think about what you do or how long that is when you sit and breathe, or you're sitting trying to be patient, you realize how long it was that it took this man to snuff out that man's life. And I really think that's what is hitting everybody, seems to be regardless of ethnicity, nationality, whether you are from Minnesota or not. We're seeing, as you pointed out, uprisings in London and Japan and China, Australia, New Zealand. And I think really that's what hits at the heart of it, was the lack of compassion on the part of somebody who was supposed to be protecting people's lives.
Right.
Reverend Al Sharpton also said it best to my brother Dwight with regards to the decades and centuries of someone's knee being in the back of your neck.
Yeah, that was a good analogy.
I think what was really revealing about this, Simone, as well, was the fact that the officer was white. I think that is important fact in the scenario. The officer also has power. We're talking about owning your power. His peers, other officers also have power. And they chose to use their power in a way that ended up in a loss of a life. Already on his stomach, already handcuffed, reasonably out of power. Right? And he did not deserve to lose his life over $20. Even if it was $5,
so ridiculous.
It was $100. Did he really need to lose his life under those circumstances? And the fact that people had to watch it from beginning to end, I think there's so many things about it that's so egregious and hurtful that I think it's just compounded with all the decades and centuries of knees in the back of our neck. It has to push the world over, right? Because whether you're from Kingston, or you're from Accra, or you're from Paris, or you're from Johannesburg, or you're from Atlanta, you probably seen, felt, or other similar situations with a knee in the back of your neck, physically and emotionally. And I'm just fed up. And in order for us to kind of get past this, we really have to own the power of how hurtful and rageful it is, right? That's because emotions are powerful, right? So one of the first things we have to have truth and reconciliation about are the emotions. That incident and all the other incidents that compounded it.
Right. The thing I think that triggers me, and I didn't watch the video, I can't, I'm good. I don't want to see, I already heard, the simple fact that he's calling out for his mother and his mother died. I think, y'all know I'm intuitive. I think he was crossing over already. Like he was actually like already in that realm. That's why he saw his mother. But the thing that gets me is these kids that will shoot up a school, these murderers that will kill like American terrorists, they will gingerly put them into the car, cover their head. They'll be so gentle. And somebody that didn't do hardly anything, they treat them like they're like mass murderers. So we have it all mixed up here. So with that said, the biggest question is, how do we tackle as an individual? Because remember, the show is about how do we affect change in our community? We can't, obviously change everybody's mind, but how can we as an individual start small and help with racial equality? What do you suggest?
I'll take this one first. I think one of the first things that you got to do personally is that you got to be truthful with your emotions and to be honest about how you feel and express how you feel. I feel frustrated. I feel angered. I feel rage. I feel disappointed. I feel sad because this is real. It really, Black people, our emotional state has been under the duress for generations.
Right.
This has to have some mental health impact to it. So you got to own how you feel about it.
Yeah.
But the key thing, you can't wallow in it. You can't stay in that moment for too long. Otherwise, you will lose your power after you've owned your emotions, right? So you got to be with your emotions. Then you got to find a way out of it. in order to keep moving, right? Because we've always had to keep moving, irrespective of the distress and the duress and the repression and the oppression that we've been on globally, across the world, for whatever melanin in our skin. We've always had to keep moving, right? So you can't stay in the emotions too long. It's rage or outrage, frustration or anger, because you gotta then wake up to figure out, okay, how are you gonna make an impact on the world? And that can take various permutations once you make that decision as to what lane you wanna go in.
Okay.
Yeah, I know we're going to be touching on how folks interact with each other, but you touched on something very early on, Simone, about the fact that people are out here tweeting or posting or engaging or protesting, and it's all the things. To piggyback on what Marlon was saying, it's like, yeah, you're sitting in those emotions, you're sitting with those feelings, and all of them are genuine, all of them are real. But to his point, like once you've kind of reached your peak sadness or your peak level of anger or your peak level of frustration, it becomes a question of what do you do, right? And whatever outlet, whether that outlet be creative, whether that outlet be intentional, whether it be an outward expression of the frustration, whether it is, again, you drafting up a sign and going out and supporting that local protest, whether it is you donating to a community organization that is engaging in this fight on a regular basis, or whether you go and cast that ballot, all those things are really productive expressions of all those emotions that you're feeling. But I do want the folks who are viewing this to understand that for Black people, this is a generational phenomenon that we have dealt with for a long time. And to that point around trauma, you have to think about this, whether it is a George Floyd or for past generation, Emmett Till, or the assassination of Dr. King, or as you mentioned, Rodney King, or Michael Brown, or Trayvon Martin. These are all individuals who have suffered inhumane, acts of inhumanity at the hands of authority figures, white authority figures, and it's like a record that keeps on spinning.
Right.
And so for people now to kind of like, the frustrating thing for these conversations that are happening now is like people coming to this like, I didn't know this was happening, or clutching their collective pearls like, what? When all this is all new to me. And it's like, no, for us,
it's been going on forever.
It's been going on forever, but here's what you got to understand is like, if Emmett Till impacts my grandmother's generation, and then Rodney King impacts my generation, and then George Floyd impacts this generation, that means that everybody at some point who was able to have a child has now had to pass down that trauma of an experience that they couldn't cover up, right? So it's like, so you're talking about people in these 20-year chunks or these 25-year chunks all having like this indelible impression on their lives that fundamentally changed who they are and how they look at themselves and how they see themselves, right? And we're still dealing with that and trying to unpack that. But then also, you also have to remember that at each one of those turns, there was a reactionary moment by Black people to try and implement change as well. So when we're having these conversations, people have to understand that it's twofold. I'm still trying to deal with the trauma, and at each step of the way, I've also tried to move the needle forward on trying to get justice for community. And now if you want to help me engage in this fight, that's great that this was your catalyst, but don't think we're new to this. And also don't try to make this as some sort of one-off moment either. Like, don't try to like characterize this as like, oh, it's upsetting what happened to George Floyd, hard stop.
Right.
No, it's bigger than that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to touch on, you actually kind of led into the next question related to how can we as individuals help change the laws? Because I was really impressed that even they just made a law for Breonna Taylor. So, I mean, I feel like things are moving. I just don't know how fast it's going to stop soon. You know, eventually it slows down and then it picks back up again, but hopefully nothing else will trigger something to pick back up. But what can we do as individuals to help change laws and do different things to?
You can do a lot. You can do a lot. You know, as long as you have breath in your lungs, you have power to do many things. Okay, I want to really underscore that. As long you say we can't breathe, as long as you are breathing, you have power to do many things, including changing laws, right? One of the things that you must remember is that you cannot be afraid of politics at any level. In fact, politics should be afraid of you. Repeat that. You should not be afraid of politics. Politics should be afraid of you. And what that means is that politics is simply different people having opinions on a particular position on something, or a value, or something in a budget, or a particular law, and they may agree or they may not agree, and the tension between when that happens, and they come. That's all politics is, right? So if you're breathing, you probably have a passion or interest in something. Some people care about the environment. Some people care about policing and relationship with law enforcement. Some people care about transportation. Some people care about cultural expression. All of those things in our lives are governed by laws. Laws created by Congress or the legislature, like Dwight served in the state legislature, or created by a county commission that I'm aspiring for, or it could be a city commission, right? These laws, Simone, don't just come out in the air. You have to have an idea that a law is needed for that. We need to put a restriction or limitation on that under the Constitution. And as long as it's constitutional, it's a law based on who the law in. And the politics comes into play, those in the majority, or those who don't use their power to vote against the majority, creates the law. Right? So if you care about something changing, relates to the situation of racial injustice, or there's some other law, you have power to kind of figure out how to go through the process of that law at the county commission level, at the state legislature level, at the congressional federal level. You can't wait for that to wake up and go, damn, where did that law come from? Sleeping on your power. Those who were breathing were using their power to create a law that they liked.
But what would be like the first step? Because it's still broad to me. Like, I don't know, like,
Sure.
If I was like, say, hey, I want to change the law with the police. Like, what would I do as a regular citizen? What do I do?
Sure.
Join some club? Like,
I'll chime in here and put on my former social studies teacher hat, right?
yeah, hook it up.
It's the simple step is having an idea, right?
Okay.
You see something wrong, you see an injustice, and whatever kind of like that simple, visceral, immediate reaction is to why is that allowed?
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea. That's the birth of the idea, right? So people are watching George Floyd die on television, and they're like, how's that possible? So you're asking yourself that question. How's that possible? How is a police officer able to do that? And so what now you have to birth is like, okay, is that legal? You know, is that allowable? Is that justified? If that is justified, should it be justified? How do I change that? So what you're seeing happen right now, and I'm just using that as an example, is now people talking about changing policing acts, changing use of excessive force acts, you know, the banning of certain chokeholds, like the one that killed Eric Garner, you know. And what does that mean? That if someone, what that means for that officer, and we're talking about policing in particular, is that if now something is banned and made illegal, and you're acting outside of that legality, what you've done now is an illegal act. So even you having the badge no longer matters at that point, because what you've done is you've committed an illegal act based on something that does not no longer exist. So for people, and that goes with anything. I mean, even the most mundane thing, like the reason that you know, the miles per hour on a highway is no longer 55 is because cars go faster, right? You know, so, you know, there was a certain point where cars only went 55 miles an hour.
Oh,
so
wow.
It made sense, right? But now when you have a car that goes double that,
right,
have to now come up with another number that both protects individuals and protects the safety of the area, but also recognizes that things are progressing. Marijuana law is a prime example, right? For years, we've always kind of viewed this thing as a legal substance. People refer to it as a gateway drug. And now people are talking about it, the medicinal qualities of it, right? Now people are talking about, should it be considered illegal? So now you have 29 states out of 50 that have some law on the books that says this is no longer, this widespread illegal narcotic, quote unquote. But now we have to get other folks to continue to catch up. So I just want to go back to the original point. Like, if you see something out there that you find problematic, you change that. But to a point that Marlon was making, politics requires engagement. So when he was talking about politics should be scared of you, when folks are saying, well, I don't do politics, or I fall back, or I don't really do.
You're talking about me, guys.
No. I'm talking about you and a lot of other people. So like you are emblematic of so many other folks out there. And I just want to say that there's nothing wrong with being vulnerable enough to say that that's what it is. But I use this analogy when talking with somebody else. It's like going out on a date and seeing somebody and going home and being like, well, I'm never going to call that person again. And you're thinking, well, the date's over. In the case of politics is going to continue to date you, whether you like that person or not. You know what I'm saying? The taxes are going to go up if you don't want them to go up. Your rent's going to go up if whether or not you choose to engage or not. Now, your engagement could shift that, meaning that if you think your rent's too high, or your taxes are too high, or they're not being used properly, your level of engagement, your level of commitment to saying, I want this used on parks instead of police. I want this to go to more buses than I want it to go to this. Your level of engagement and involvement in the process will ultimately be the thing that shifts the priorities of where politics goes.
You got to meet the process, Simone. You got to meet the process where you're most comfortable, right? Some people are comfortable on the streets holding up the sign. A very important role, protesting, right? Constitutionally, right? With the constitutional rights that you have. Some people are comfortable being part of the digital campaign, right? In terms of spreading the word. Some people are more comfortable raising the money, right? Remember the civil rights movement, there was a different role for Martin and a different role for Harry Belafonte. Everyone had a different role. But you got to meet the process where you're very comfortable. You got to find your lane and find your role. The one thing is that you can't really be on the sidelines spectating. Otherwise, you are laying down on your power. And if you and your friends care about certain things, but one friend is more active and the other friend is indifferent, you won't be able to move the needle in the same way.
But the one main thing I'm trying to understand is, I come up with the idea of a law. I want to fix it. I want to change it. Where do I go? Do I just go to like a town hall meeting? Like, what do you do?
You find a commissioner.
Yeah, that's just it. It's like, where is that idea kind of rooting itself in, right? And what's the governing entity that handles that, right? So going back to old school schoolhouse rock, there are different levels of government, federal, state, and local, right? And so if you're having a challenge with a pothole on your street, then that's very much a local thing. If you're walking outside and you're seeing your car's, getting messed up because of a pothole on a local road, then you take that, you redress that with your local government. However, if you're talking about the fact that you haven't seen your uncle or your cousin or your auntie because 20 years ago they got caught carrying, cocaine, and all of a sudden they got busted in some federal drug bust, that's a larger conversation that you take up with your congressperson, or when you're talking about who you elect to the presidency around the change of federal laws. At the state level, same thing. What is the state doing? The state controls things like school funding, hospital funding. So it's like those are the kind of conversations that you're having. So wherever you're being most impacted is where you're going to take your message to.
I actually have a question from Michael Racklin, which I'm sure you both know who she is, friend of the show as well. She wanted to know, what do each of you think are the let me read this properly. What do they each see as the most important local laws and initiatives that we should be more focused on to improve? They're talking about Miami. Me personally, because this is not just a Miami show, if you can make it a little broader, like what laws do you think are the most important that we need to focus on for social justice issues is the actual full question.
I think that it's very important that you must know, do you live in a city or do you live in a county, right? Because you can live in a city and a county at the same time, but you could also, like, whether you live in the city of Atlanta or do you live in Warner Robins or something like that, right? Or do you live in Coral Gables or do you live in Miami Gardens, right? So you got to be aware of the city that you're in and the county where you live, because that will determine who has responsibility for what types of services, right, Simone? And where the money comes from to pay for those services. The money is key, right? You just like your house budget, your budget reflects values of your home, your priorities. So what are the priorities of your city and what are the priorities of your county? So the budget as a general thought is a very important part of you determining what your community considers important, right? So if you have a budget that spends, what do you think, Dwight, 40 to 50% on policing, and the rest of the budget is on everything else, then what is really the most important, right? So you may need to start asking the questions, if your budget reflects your values, that you may need to reshuffle your priorities in order to assert where you want to spend your money, right? And that could come to the point of the social justice issues that you care about. Michael cares about young women and single mothers, having and owning their girl power. So are they receiving sufficient funding for the issues that single moms have to burden in this community? Taking care of primarily young Black men who are getting into trouble that end up in the hands of interacting with policing. So it's all connected. It's not in a silo, Simone. So the budget is something very important. Do you know the budget cycle for your city?
Okay.
And not when the budget is about to be passed, when the budget is being drafted.
How do we find that out? Where do you go to find the budget of your city? I'm curious.
Well, yeah, I mean, you check with a city manager, with your local city council person. Like, many cities like Atlanta, like Miami, you have these districts, you have these individuals that are saying that they're representative of the community, right? But many of the folks don't know. Like, in terms of my job, the state of Florida has 40 senators. So I'd be at all these different places and people would be like, well, when are you going back to DC? And I'm like, I don't work in DC. I work in Tallahassee. There's a difference between state and federal government, and understanding the distinction between the two. And again, there's no such thing as a silly question. So it's not a knock on people who don't know, because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
But what ends up happening is people feel like they're impacted by something, and then they want to react. And then they're like, wait, I don't know where to go or what to do. And it's like, it's a frustrating feeling. And we talked about this notion of helplessness, right? Like, because like you're feeling the anger, you're feeling the frustration, and you're like, I don't know where to direct it. Not understanding that it's literally right around the corner, right? Like, in the case of Georgia, Georgia has almost 200 members of its legislature. Even though their population is about 9 million people less than the state of Florida.
Oh,
so
wow.
You have more representatives, for you, which means you have these smaller districts with people that are probably interacting at the local grocery store that you're probably seeing. You're like, oh, I saw him at a rally, or I saw this community flyer, or this person's having a community meeting, but I don't feel like going. And then there's moments like these will pop up, and you're like, remember that time when I decided to, like, watch Netflix versus go to the community meeting. I guess it was a thing, but it's at the end of the day, it's not like you can't pick up the phone or go shoot an email or hop on Twitter or hop on Instagram, because all of these folks live in those spaces as well. You know, you're talking about somebody in the White House who they call the tweeter in chief, right? Like, this is somebody who deliberately interacts on a particular social media platform. But you have to understand what that means. That means that now everybody else has to deliberately react to that same social media platform. So everybody you're trying to get in contact with lives in these spaces that you're operating in on a regular basis, but people are too fearful. They act like, oh, well, I have to form my email in a particular way, or I have to say a certain thing, and I don't want to come off too unintelligent. But you will roast like a Charlemagne the God, right? Because you're like, I feel like I can say anything to this person that I have never physically met, yet you feel you have to act a particular way to this person who lives around the corner.
Right.
And people have to get out of that mindset. Like, if you're feeling a type of way, like if you want to send a tweet, and I say this as a former elected, if you feel angry enough to shoot me a tweet that says you need to fix this effing problem, then guess what? And then you put it in all caps, I'm going to react to that because I just saw it, right? I'm going to be like, whoa, okay, somebody out here is mad. So let's now figure out what the next steps are. Like, that same sense of urgency and that same energy that people feel about critiquing clothing, or when American Airlines lose your bags and you start tweeting them. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, right. you gotta take that to your city hall. You got to take that same energy to your state house. You got to take that to the members of Congress, because you can't put people on this unique pedestal as though you can't approach them, right, where you feel more connected to a Kim Kardashian than you do to a Keisha Lance Bottoms. Right?
Well, we have a lot more questions, and we have run out of time, unfortunately. So I think we're going to have to do a part 2 and a 3. But I think one of the things that seems to be a common question was related to the budget and how do we move the money around, because everybody keeps talking about defund the police, defund the police. Like, my first thing that came to mind for me was, if we defund the police systems or the precincts, I'm a little concerned. Are they going to say, oh, can't afford cameras anymore? Like, I'm a little afraid that they're going to start saying they don't have enough money for other stuff. So I don't know.
I would leave people with this point, right? When COVID-19 first struck and kids had to be homeschooled, and everybody was like, well, we don't have laptops for the kids. We don't have Wi-Fi. Okay. Yeah. Then you had hospitals saying we need masks and we need PPE and we need gloves. One thing you did not see in the midst of all these protests is the police coming and saying we need more tear gas and more rubber bullets.
Okay.
Right? So when we talk about priority issues in that budget, you got to think, same pool of money that funded those schools or didn't fund those schools or didn't fund those hospitals, somehow knew that armored vehicles, rubber bullets, and tear gas was somehow going to be necessary for something you didn't know was going to happen, right? So I want people to think about that when they think about the prioritization of where money goes. Is that if you have a hospital that in a crisis doesn't have enough gloves for its nurses, right? You have a school system that does not have Wi-Fi or computer access for its students in the case of emergency, but people already have enough gas, tear gas, and rubber bullets for you on the outside chance you might roll up and decide to protest because you saw a man murdered on television. That's a misplaced priority.
Right.
And that's where people should move their energy.
Wow. So you guys, thank you so much for being here. And like I said, we are going to do a part 2 and possibly a 3, because we want to talk more about policing the police. We want to talk about supporting Black businesses and also just getting more involved in the community. I want to have more tips on that, like what the next steps could be. Because I have so many questions that I didn't get to ask. So sorry, guys. You'll be featured in the next show. But thank you so much. Just, do you want to leave like a website or anything for people to reach out to you? And Marlon, we got to vote for Marlon.
You can check me out at marlonhill.com for sure. The election is August 18th. You can vote by mail. You can vote early. Do what you need to do. Start getting yourself prepared for these elections that are coming up. I want to recommend TurboVote. TurboVote sends you a text reminder for every election that you participate in. Check it out, turbovote.org.
And how can we donate to your campaign?
MarlonHill.com. You can donate to the campaign from wherever you are in the world. You can be as a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. If you are live in Atlanta, you can donate to the campaign at MarlonHill.com. You can volunteer for the campaign,
I got you, Marlon.
but you must live in District 9 to vote for me on August 18th.
Wonderful. Dwight, any last words? Website?
Yeah, New Florida Majority. We're on all social media platforms. New NEWFL Majority on Instagram and Twitter. NewFloridaMajority.org if you want to find out and get involved in the work that we do. We do have partner organizations in some of the key states, including Georgia. Shout out to New Georgia Project and all the great work they're doing for voter registration and voter engagement. And wouldn't be remiss, NAACP has been the oldest, boldest, and coldest civil rights organization, now having been around for 111 years. We always encourage folks to sign up. You do not have to be Black to be a member of the NAACP. You can just be a member of the NAACP, NAACP.org. If you want to be part of the South Bay branch, look for us on the website. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. So thank you so much for being here. And everybody, please reach out to them, get involved in your community. Stay tuned, but probably in the next couple of weeks, we'll do a part 2. And keep it locked on Own Your Power. Remember, anything you want is attainable. Own your power.